It's hard for somebody who doesn't have the legal background to understand sentencing guidelines because, as you can see here, if you can see on the camera, this is essentially the felony sentencing guidelines.
Hello, I'm Bill Mance with Jackson County Close-Up. We're continuing our discussion with Chief Deputy District Attorney Jeremy Markowitz. So Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
There's this thing we always hear about, which is basically sentencing guidelines that are established in a lot of different ways. So tell us a little bit about how that affects your job and the job of the District Attorney's Office.
So sentencing guidelines really, it's hard for somebody who doesn't have the legal background to understand sentencing guidelines because, as you can see here, if you can see on the camera, this is essentially the felony sentencing guidelines. You have a bunch of information on the back. You have your grid block, which is how they do sentencing in Oregon, is off this grid block. So take a C felony, for example. If I go out and I Google, if I'm a victim of a crime, and I go out and say I'm a victim of identity theft.
Okay.
And I Google identity theft, it's going to say, for Oregon, it's going to say it's a C felony with a maximum term of imprisonment of 5 years. Okay. But you can throw that out the window because that doesn't take into consideration the guidelines. So identity theft on your guidelines, the crimes are scored from 1 to 11, 1 being a felony drug possession, up to 11 being a murder. Identity theft is scored as a 2.
Okay. All right.
And so then what you have to do is you look at somebody's criminal history, and an A being somebody who's a fairly violent offender. They have at least 3 person felonies, and they go all the way down to I, which is somebody who has a very limited criminal history. Actually, an I has no criminal history. So if you look at this grid block, and I know it's hard to see here, so identity theft is a 2 right here. This pink basically means it discusses sanction units. For the basic sense, what it means is 10 days in jail. If I'm a 2A and I have a violent criminal history, I'm still 10 days in jail for identity theft.
Oh, okay.
Now, what changes that is if you have somebody who commits a lot of property crimes, then they fall under, so now you're out of the grid block, but you're into repeat property offender statutes where that can open up other things. That can open up Department of Corrections sentences for identity theft, but you have to have the predicate convictions in order to actually get to that point. And so you could see how somebody who's doing their own research sees identity theft and says, well, it's maximum imprisonment of 5 years.
I want that person for 5 years, yeah.
And that's not the case. And the one that you really see that really throws it out of whack is, so possession of heroin is going to be a 1 if it's a felony, but it's a B felony. So now you're talking about 10 years, it would say, is somebody's maximum term of imprisonment, but there is no way that a drug possession, a crime category 1, could ever send somebody to the Department of Corrections. The most you could ever do was 6 months as a local sentence. So you just sort of see how that sort of, the sentencing grid blocks really skew this idea of what an A felony is, what a B felony is, what a C felony is.
Right, we try to simplify it as a public, even though, and it has some really thoughtfulness in terms of the individual once again and how they repeat offend or
and you know, you have the sentencing grid block, and then you get into people that have the repeat offenses, and you know there may be other ways that get you off the grid blocks, but again, I could probably speak on this for hours and still not cover everything.